What's up, guys? This is Derek from moreplatesmoredates.com. Today, I'm going to be talking about SARMs and their impact on hair loss. So, the first thing a lot of guys want to know is, do SARMs cause hair loss? And this is the lesser part of the video I want to touch on, but blanket statement, all SARMs can cause hair loss. The extent to which they can cause it is based upon their own inherent selectivity and energenicity. So, there is no SARM as of now that is completely selective for myotrophic to androgenic activity in the body. At some dosage for every SARM, no matter what it is, you're going to induce prostate growth, which in turn is going to have an effect on hair follicles on your head, facial hair growth, viralization side effects. So that's something to take into account. But the thing to consider with that is the purpose of SARMs. The reason they're created is to replace the therapeutic anabolic benefits of testosterone on muscle tissue and bone. So the dosage at which many SARMs in clinical development fulfill and hit that threshold of therapeutic activity, many of those lack androgenic activity, and not lack, but more so that because they suppress endogenous production of testosterone and DHT, in turn DHT, not DHT specifically, but testosterone, it lowers the androgen index in the body. And this indirectly reduces prostate size and reduces potentially hair loss. And typically, if there's a case of somebody losing hair on SARMs, it's a result of telogen effluvium, or they're just using a massive megadose of a SARM way beyond what the probable therapeutic dosage would be established at, pending it actually made it to, past phase 3 and got approved. So as far as can SARMs cause hair loss? Yes, but they can also prevent hair loss. And that's, at least theoretically, I can't, state that definitively because there's no clinical study to actually, assess this specifically. But anecdotally, if you reverse engineer how SARMs work, you can see how they're going to play out on hair loss prevention. And in practical application, a lot of guys who experiment have, figured out that it does work like this in certain aspects. So basically, how SARMs work is when they're taken, they suppress the endogenous production of luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and in turn lowers natural testosterone production. So the result of this is, a suppression of the endogenous androgens that progress androgenic alopecia. So in a sense, it's almost like a systemic anti-androgen, except it also fulfills the anabolic properties that you would lose via dropping testosterone. So this is where it becomes super, super, super interesting, in my opinion, and has a lot of potential in the future once it starts getting looked at in this context. But in, theoretical, hypothetical scenarios, what happens, and this is actually, I'll reference a study on S1. This is one of the first SARMs that was in preclinical development. It was actually abandoned because of its not nearly as effective as some of the ones that are in, stage 2 clinical trials now, like LGD4033 and Austrian. But at the time, this was, one of the first SARMs in creation, and they did an efficacy comparison of S1 compared to finasteride on a preclinical rodent model. So what this study assessed was S1, which is like one of the worst SARMs, compared to finasteride, how effective it was at suppressing benign prostatic hyperplasia, which is basically decreasing prostate size. So as you know, finasteride is approved for, decreasing size of prostate, which indirectly the makers of the drug figured out it reduces hair loss. So off-label, it's prescribed for hair loss prevention as well. And then eventually Propecia was created, the brand name of finasteride, which is meant for hair loss prevention. But the mechanism of action behind the hair loss prevention is indirectly caused by a suppression of endogenous androgens via dropping DHT, which is ultimately which lowers prostate size. So when they compared S1 compared to finasteride, and I believe they actually compared flutamide to these two, you will note by looking at the graph, at all dosages tested, S1 outperformed finasteride in efficacy measures. So not only did it reduce prostate size more than finasteride, which in turn lowers hair loss miniaturization, it also induced a greater amount of anabolic activity than finasteride, meaning it can sustain the physiological functions fulfilled by testosterone in muscle tissue and bone with a lower androgen load on the body and theoretically less hair loss. So how does this play out in, real practical application? The more selective of a compound that's, used on a research subject, the more efficacious it is for potential hair loss prevention measures. So let's just say you have something with, a 500 to 1 myotrophic to androgenic ratio of selectivity. You could theoretically keep muscle tissue and bone, maintenance at therapeutic levels while simultaneously nuking testosterone and DHT via, the suppression of natural testosterone level in the body. And concurrently, like while those two things are happening, you reduce the endogenous androgen load on the body. So by taking this SARM, the, rodent or whatever is being tested on, obviously this doesn't translate directly to human, clinical application or anything like that. But in theory, this is how it works most of the time: is lower androgen index, decrease prostate size, decrease hair loss. On the opposite side of the spectrum, if you administer proviron or drostanolone or literal DHT to a subject, you increase prostate size, you increase facial hair growth, you increase body hair growth, and you increase hair loss. So the goal is basically having as low of an androgen profile while fulfilling that anabolic benefit. And then where it gets more interesting too is, so SARMs, they don't aromatize into estrogen. So this is the inherent flaw of SARMs and kind of what will eventually exclude them from hormone replacement therapy alternative options. Because when you suppress endogenous testosterone and DHT too much, what you do, despite being able to, prevent miniaturization, what you're doing at the same time is preventing the production of the hormone that aromatizes into estrogen in the male body, which is also, fairly necessary for mediating healthy hair growth. And that's not really something talked about either. Is, everyone, well, not everyone, but there are theories thrown around that chronically elevated estrogen is the cause of hair loss. But, just look at the hormone profile of a girl. High estrogen, progesterone levels 2/3 of the year are under or the same as men essentially, and low androgen index. Whereas men, we have, just enough estrogen to fulfill physiological functions, and then high testosterone and DHT, and, minimal progesterone as well. So at the end of the day, once you suppress this testosterone and DHT endogenously with a SARM, you eventually crush estrogen into the ground in parallel to testosterone and DHT being suppressed. So what this puts, the experiment or whatever, like the situation that would fix this is the administration of oral estrogen, which obviously in the context of hormone replacement therapy is like far out of the realm of possibility of being approved for male usage, in my opinion. But I think in the hair loss space, for people who are like, I'm not advising anyone to do this, by the way. This is all hypothetical, theoretical things. And any examples I give of practical application are people who, do this on their own without doctor supervision, which is not advised, obviously. But I'm just talking about, things I've noticed that I find interesting in the space in terms of how things work in the body. So obviously disclaimer on that. And there's a disclaimer at the start of the video as well. But just talking about the mechanism of action of how this stuff works, SARMs will inevitably greatly suppress testosterone DHT, which, in turn can help prevent hair loss if a mega dose of the SARM isn't being used, or, it's being used at, therapeutic amounts, whatever that is to be determined for that particular SARM. And then concurrently, oral estrogen administration to keep estrogen levels around, 30 picograms per milliliter, which is, the therapeutic healthy range for men, which would then in turn drop androgen index in the body to an amount that is, sustains a lack of, hair loss miniaturization, mediates healthy hair growth with adequate estrogen levels, and prevents major androgen side effects, and concurrently, drops prostate size. And I'm not sure why there wasn't more studies done on this specifically, because it looks like a really promising area. And the S1 study in particular, I have referenced before, and the data comparing other SARMs to finasteride is even more promising. Like S1 is one of the worst SARMs and one of the first ones that was developed. And looking at other things from this context, I think it's really interesting to reverse engineer it. And I think as the scope broadens in terms of, selective androgen receptor modulators and potential therapeutic applications, it's going to start being looked at in this potential context as well. And I see great potential in it. And I've seen, real world practical examples of people who have, replicated this theory in, real life studies. And it's really interesting. And I just wanted to explain how it works, because it's not really clear if, do SARMs cause hair loss? Do they reverse hair loss? What do they do exactly? It all depends on the SARM being used, the androgen index of that SARM, of its selectivity for anabolic to androgenic activity, as well as, the dosage used. At the end of the day, hair loss all boils down to whatever androgens are floating around in the bloodstream, in the system, their selectivity for anabolic to androgenic activity, and how they transcribe their effects and activate androgen receptors, and their inherent androgenicity, and the total amount in the body as well. Because you could have something that's really selective, but if a huge amount was circulating in the body, that's more than enough to still induce prostate growth and hair loss. So really interesting subject. I wanted to share some of the data, specifically the S1 versus finasteride data with you guys. You might find it interesting like I did. And anyways, thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplatesmoredates.com, subscribe there. Check out my Instagram. It's at moreplates_moredates, and check me out on Facebook and Twitter. I always forget to plug my other social media, but check me out on Instagram, because I actually, post stories and somewhat daily activity, which I don't really do on YouTube. So check me out there, and I'll talk to you guys soon.